Last night I listened to a webcast by my favorite contemporary mystic and activist, Andrew Harvey. Anyone ever heard of him? Many, okay. So he's a 60-year-old gay man who was born in India, British parents, and was actually educated in the West, but grew up with that Hindu sensibility as well, and considers himself today a Shivite mystic, Shiva. But he's an extremely powerful speaker and very smart and very profound in spirituality. He's going to be giving a course. You can look it up, divinehumancourse.com, about the divine human, which is really, and however you want to phrase it, in whatever tradition, is really what we're all called to be. And he presents both an historical and individual psychological, spiritual journey for that. He outlined in four stages, which would be worth looking at briefly. In history of humanity, of course, you still find these, as he points out, these traditions today, the autochthonous, the shamanic traditions of the world. And I've experienced this a few times on my own, for myself. These are great fountains of wisdom, which we can still very much profit from today. Have more dialogue with them. The Japanese Shingon Buddhist group that I work with had done their program recently down in Cusco, Peru, and discovered that the shamanic people and shamans in the Catholic Church weren't talking too much together, which is pointed out as very sad. Anyway, the main point he was making after that, in the second stage, historically, and also in a sense, well, definitely a crucial turning point in the spiritual experience of an individual is the transcendental, which in the axial age, historically speaking, was the source of all the great religious traditions, East and West, whether Buddhism or Hinduism. We're talking about the 9th, 8th, 7th century BC, and then of course the Hebrew and then eventually the Christian traditions, where the experience of the transcendent comes through. And the experience of the transcendent, both historically and psychologically for the individual, totally throws you for a loop. And a lot of psychological issues can come up there, which are difficult to resolve. And there's an intoxication with the transcendent. It's a kind of and I experienced this very strongly myself in my own life, the desire to flee, from ordinary reality and just go off into a mountaintop, which I literally did, to be with and explore this transcendent. And it's the instinct in itself is not wrong. But I like the term he used last night, which is, and he applied it to himself as well. It'll happen to almost anyone with a strong experience of the transcendent. As he called it, an addiction to the transcendent, which is a good phrase. We can become addicted to the transcendent. It's what, truth be told, is what the Mahayana Buddhists accuse the Hinayan, what the Theravadan Buddhists of being, kind of just being the arhat on the mountaintop instead of having a greater integration. Whereas Zen, like Christianity, which is why the two blend so well, emphasizes, right here and now, in the experience of our ordinary reality, the transcendent is there and can be experienced in a most integrated fashion right there. So there's not a divorce between the different levels of reality. As Richard Rohr says, there's not a difference between sacred and profane. Or the wonderful koan that I've commented on many times at the beginning of the Book of Serenity, which has the king of the gods, the Hindu gods himself, walking with the Buddha and saying, where can we build a shrine? And the blade of grass is set up to be the temple where the absolute is experienced, right, in an ordinary blade of grass or a grain of sand. But the whole point being, an oak tree in the garden, many of these koans that point you right to the here and now, to experience it, non-duality, as we say, not where all the aspects of reality are not separated out, but rather integrated in the experience. Now, we Christians should have done a much better job than we did. We became Platonists rather than, Christians. Since we say the incarnation, we believe God and flesh are one, and yet we haven't really lived that out very well to this present day. Fear of the body, fear of the feminine, fear of earth, fear of the dark. And that's an important point. Everyone from Carl Jung, Andrew Harvey pointing this out, that in this alchemical journey, in this journey to integrate these facets of reality, we need to face the shadow. We need to face that dark part, and that's maybe one of the reasons we haven't done very well with it. All the traditions have somehow failed here to a certain extent, because it's scary. To go down into the full power of what we would call the created world, of matter, to integrate it into a whole, to have our whole being into one, where there's no longer any conceptual difference between body and soul, and soul and God. I mean, it's an integral experience. That's a challenge. It's a challenge. So that's why he says the third important stage where this is done, and he refers to it in Hindu terms and Tibetan Buddhist terms as the tantric stage, which is really this stage in which the absolute and the relative have their marriage, and to use that image, which all the traditions use in some way or another, whether it's Christ in the church or Krishna or Samantabhadra, all the different symbols for the marriage of the absolute and the relative. And of course, this is the great Zen position that emptiness is form and form is emptiness. The identity of relative and absolute, the Sandukai, precisely, there it is, the identity of relative and absolute, that sutra has a line in it which addresses the addiction to the transcendent, where it says, "He who has experienced the absolute is not yet enlightened." That was an important verse for me, in my own Zen practice, my own spiritual growth. But it points it out directly. The one who has experienced the absolute, transcendent, is not yet enlightened. That's just the first step. Don't get addicted or attached to that element. So I'd like to illustrate that. And then the fourth stage, which is really important, Zen has it in the ox herding pictures of the person coming back to the marketplace with arms extended, to bring compassion and light to everyone. And obviously the Christian tradition has it. Christians, the Catholic Church, for example, will not consider someone a saint just because they had, or are purported to have had, great mystical experiences, changes of consciousness and all this stuff, but only if they actually manifested that in charity and love to their fellow human beings. And that's very accurate. So the fourth stage, as Andrew puts it, as Andrew exemplified, is sacred activism, when you actually come back to the world and express this. It expresses itself through you, really, is what happens. So we have to see the sacredness, or as Richard Rohr said in a recent email, it's not, there's no sacred and profane, there's only sacred and desecrated. That's really well said. They're sacred and desecrated because we have desecrated what was never profane to begin with. We haven't treated the earth, the environment, our bodies, ourselves, with the reverence that they merit. So I'd like to illustrate some of these points, as Roshi often does and as Andrew does, with poetry in various traditions, to illustrate these last several points of seeing all things united together, and then the activism which should flow from that. I have three selections. The first one is this is an anthology that Andrew, of poets, which Andrew had, mystics, which Andrew edited. And this is Basho, the great Japanese Zen poet. You may have seen haikus of his around over the years. He's actually 17th century. But of him, one of his disciples said, "The master said, learn about a pine tree from a pine tree. In about a bamboo stalk from a bamboo stalk. It was go right there into the concrete. What he meant was, his disciple says, that the poet should detach his mind from self, be at one with everything, and enter into the object, sharing its delicate life and its feelings. And likewise, when you get to know someone, another person, getting out of yourself to understand and empathize with them. Whereupon, in this case, a poem forms itself. Description of the object is not enough unless the poem contains feelings which have come from the object. Unless you can really go in and become one with whatever whoever you're contemplating, including, of course, God. Then the object and the poet's self will be separate things. But the object and the self are not separate things. We're not separate from anything or anyone. And to illustrate this absolute relative coming together, here's one of his haiku translated. Sparrows in eaves, mice in ceiling, celestial music. So just the birds up in the eaves, or even the mice in the ceiling or in the floor when you're, or in New York, the rats in the subway. It's celestial music. The music of heaven. There's no separation. Let's move ahead a few hundred years to Andrew's favorite poet, Walt Whitman. Considers him the greatest mystic and the greatest American mystic. This is from the Song of Myself. It's the whole section 48. And this speaks for itself. We'll see how it fits in with what I'm saying. I have said that the soul is not more than the body. And I have said that the body is not more than the soul. And nothing, not God, is greater to one than oneself is. No separation. Whoever walks a furlong without sympathy walks to his own funeral, dressed in his shroud. Where's your compassion? Where's your connection? And I, or you, pocketless of the dime, may purchase the pick of the earth, possessing nothing, we possess all things, as St. Paul said. And to glance with an eye or show a bean in its pod confounds the learning of all time. Jacques Maritain said, the taste of a cherry between the teeth is greater than the Summa Theologica. There is no trade or employment, but the young man following it may become a hero. And there is no object so soft, but it makes a hub for the wheeled universe. God is someone whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. And any man or woman shall stand cool and supercilious before a million universes, connected to everything. Supercilious in a good sense. And I call to mankind, be not curious about God. For I, who am curious about each, am not curious about God. No array of terms can say how much I am at peace about God and about death. I hear and behold God in every object. Yet I understand God not in the least. The transcendent mystery present everywhere. That's why you don't worry about God. God is everywhere. Nor do I understand who there can be more wonderful than myself. Connected to everything. It's right here. Comes from the Holy Spirit, if you will. Why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God in each hour of the 24. And each moment, in the faces of men and women, I see God. As the Desert Father said we should. And in my own face, in the glass. I find letters from God dropped in the street. And every one is signed by God's name. And I leave them where they are. For I know that others will punctually come, forever and ever. You don't need to cling to anything, and even a revelation of God, because as soon as you go one step, there's another one right there, signed by God's name. Fantastic. So he was certainly a mystic. And finally, another of Andrew's favorite poets, and maybe yours too, Rumi. This is a shorter one on, which I think expresses this sense of connectedness and compassion, which then should flow organically and immediately. As I say, it's working through you rather than you're doing anything anymore. The title is Bend, Tend, Disappear. Well, that's good. Bend, tend, disappear. I don't know which part is the hardest, probably disappear. This is how you change when you go to the orchard, the vineyard if you like, where the heart opens. You become fragrance. You're the odor of Christ, Paul said. You become fragrance and the light that burning oil gives off. Keep your lamps burning. Light. Long strands of grieving hair. It's beautiful. Long strands of grieving hair. Lion and at the same time, gazelle. There's a lot there. You take on the pain of the whole universe. Both sides of it, lion or gazelle. Long strands of grieving hair, lion and at the same time, gazelle. You're walking alone without feet, as river water does. You penetrate everywhere, simply and smoothly. The taste of a wine that is bitter and sweet. Seen and unseen, neither wet nor dry. Like Jesus reaching to touch. Okay, that's Rumi's word. Rumi's talking about Jesus, as the Muslims do. The taste of a wine that is bitter and sweet, like Jesus reaching to touch. That's what we should be doing. We should be Jesus reaching to touch. A new road appears, without desirous imagining, inside God's breath. Empty. Where you quit saying the name and there's no distance. You don't pronounce names, no concepts anymore. No separation. There's no distance. No calling dove coo. A window. A wild rose at the field's edge. You will be me. Who will be who? Well, you will be me. But don't feel proud or happy. It just is. Bend like the limb of a peach tree. Tend those who need help. Disappear 3 days with the moon. That's good. In the cycle of life, like the moon, but just like the moon disappears for 3 days every month, you need to disappear. At least for 3 days. Like Jesus did. Bend, tend, disappear. And finally, don't pray to be healed or look for evidence of, quote, some other world. You are the soul and medicine for what wounds the soul. There's a whole koan about medicine and sickness, about everything in the world is medicine. So here it says, he's saying, you are the soul and you are the medicine for what wounds the soul. So go from transcendence to immanence to integration to compassion. Any comments or questions? Just do it. So sit for a few minutes, absorb.